Hello and welcome to the AI Affairs Podcast.
It's great to be here for this one.
Today we've got a fascinating deep dive lined up for you, looking at how a really massive shift in global power is playing out. And it's not happening on traditional battlefields. It's happening right inside the servers, the neural networks, and the algorithms that run our daily lives.
Yeah, we are moving way past the theoretical debates about artificial intelligence at this point.
Exactly. Our mission today is to unpack the reality of how Canada is aggressively maneuvering in the global AI arms race to secure what they're calling digital sovereignty. We'll be exploring a groundbreaking new international AI alliance, dissecting a pretty surprising clash in how different countries are actually writing the code of their AI laws and, uncovering how researchers are deploying a brand new AI-powered tool to catch some incredibly sophisticated foreign disinformation campaigns.
It's a critical moment. We're entering an era of hard infrastructure, binding legislation, and active live-fire deployments on our social media feeds.
Before we jump into the mechanics of all this, I do want to make a quick but really important note for you, our listener. The topics we're diving into today inherently contain some highly politically charged elements.
Right, we're talking international relations, specific U.S. administrations, and foreign states.
Yeah, like Russia and China. So we want to state clearly that as your hosts, we do not take sides or endorse any of these political viewpoints. We're strictly analyzing the factual landscape and the technological forces shaping these geopolitical moves just to help you understand the broader picture.
Our goal here is synthesis. We're looking at the technical and policy realities entirely separate from taking any sort of political stance.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If you look at the current global AI stack, it is overwhelmingly bifurcated right now.
Heavily dominated by just two players, really.
Right. You have the United States completely dominating the hyperscaler space with companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. And then on the flip side, you have China pushing this massive, heavily state-subsidized technological nationalism.
And that duopoly creates an immense geopolitical pressure cooker for basically everyone else. I mean, when the foundational technology of the entire global economy is controlled by just two superpowers, mid-sized economies start to realize just how vulnerable their strategic dependencies actually are.
Vulnerable is a good word for it.
Think about it. If your banking sector, your healthcare logistics, and your defense grids are all running on compute infrastructure that's owned by foreign tech giants, you don't actually have control over your own economic security.
And you have to add the immediate trade uncertainty to that mix, too. We're looking at an environment right now where the America First policy is front and center.
Which brings a lot of economic leverage into play.
It does. We've seen threats from the Trump administration regarding steep tariffs on Canadian goods. There's even been some rhetoric floating a potential 100% tariff hike if Canada were to enter certain major multilateral trade deals.
That kind of economic sword of Damocles really forces a nation's hand.
Exactly. And that is exactly what drove the events of February 14th, 2026. Right on the margins of the Munich Security Conference, we saw a massive, calculated play.
It wasn't just a photo op, that's for sure.
No. Canada's Minister of Artificial Intelligence, Evan Solomon, and Germany's Minister for Digital Transformation, Karsten Wildberger, they signed a joint declaration of intent on AI.
And officially launched the Sovereign Technology Alliance.
The STA, right. If we connect this to the broader economic playbook, this is a direct strategy that's been heavily influenced by figures like Prime Minister Mark Carney. It's an explicit push for trade diversification to build a third option.
Right, because democratic nations are actively looking for a way out of this absolute reliance on the U.S. and China. By pooling their resources, they're trying to build indigenous, secure AI capabilities.
So what does that actually look like?
Well, the STA is built on three core pillars: expanding secure compute infrastructure, accelerating AI commercialization across borders, and developing a shared talent pipeline. They are trying to build a complete end-to-end ecosystem.
Let me push back on this for just a second, because that ambition sounds great on paper. But can Canada and Germany actually build a viable third option? I mean, can a coalition of mid-sized tech sectors genuinely compete with the sheer raw compute density of an AWS server farm in Virginia?
Or a massive Tencent facility, right.
It feels a bit like trying to build a boutique airline to compete with Boeing.
It's a completely fair critique, and honestly, it's the billion-dollar question right now. But the STA isn't actually trying to outcompute the U.S. hyperscalers on raw processing power.
They're not.
No, they're competing on trust architecture. That's why they are heavily integrating the Gaia X framework into this alliance. Gaia-X is fundamentally different from a centralized cloud. It's a federated, secure data infrastructure.
Right, the key technical differentiator there being federated.
Exactly. Instead of all your data being ingested into one massive proprietary black box owned by a single Silicon Valley company, Gaia-X provides a neutral, transparent API environment.
So it connects different hubs without centralized ownership.
Yes, it allows different European and Canadian data centers to connect and share models without ever surrendering the underlying data to a centralized authority. The primary technical goal here is to prevent vendor lock-in.
So if a Canadian hospital network or a German defense contractor wants to utilize a new generative AI service, they aren't trapped forever in one company's ecosystem.
Right, paying exorbitant egress fees if they ever want to move their own data.
Yeah, they maintain actual cryptographic sovereignty over their information. That makes sense. And the alliance extends beyond just the hardware layer, right? It's deeply embedded in the philosophy of the models themselves.
Oh, absolutely. There is a very specific collaboration highlighted in the sources with Law Zero.
That's the Canadian nonprofit founded by the Turing Prize winner, Professor Yoshua Bengio.
That's the one. And their entire technical focus is on developing safe-by-design AI systems.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, looking at the geopolitical board. The contrast in global approaches is just stark right now.
It really is night and day.
While the U.S. debate right now is aggressively focused on removing regulatory hurdles to maximize innovation speed.
Even pushing back on voluntary risk management frameworks from agencies like NIST.
Exactly. Canada and Germany are leaning hard into this idea of trustworthy, values-based AI. They're making this massive macroeconomic bet that AI built with verifiable data privacy and democratic ethical standards will eventually become a premium competitive advantage, not just a regulatory burden.
And they're heavily publicizing this philosophical alignment, too. I mean, Canada is officially hosting Germany as the country of the year at the upcoming All-In AI conference in Montreal.
That's in September 2026.
Right. And that is a loud signal to the global market. They want venture capital, startups, and researchers cross-pollinating between these two hubs immediately.
But, you know, it's one thing for politicians to shake hands on a stage in Munich about incubating trustworthy AI startups. It's entirely another thing when you look at the actual legal code they're drafting back home to govern it.
Which brings us to a massive paradox in this whole digital sovereignty push.
Yeah, the regulatory reality is where the friction truly begins. We all know the European Union has been the global heavyweight when it comes to tech regulation with their massive AI Act.
Setting the gold standard for compliance, essentially.
Right, and Canada has been simultaneously pushing its proposed Artificial Intelligence and Data Act,
known as ADA, which is tucked inside Bill C-27.
You would naturally assume, given the EU's historical reputation for aggressive tech regulation, that their law would be the strictest. But when you dig into the legal analyses,
specifically looking at tech law firms like Macmillan LLP and Access Privacy.
yeah, there is a massive red flag. Canada's proposed law is actually much broader and potentially far more punitive than the EU's.
It fundamentally comes down to how each jurisdiction approaches the architecture of risk. The EU AI Act is guided by an overarching legal principle of proportionality.
Meaning the rules match the risk.
Exactly. They focus primarily on regulating what they call general-purpose AI models. And the level of compliance required is strictly proportional to the actual demonstrable risk the system poses to human rights or safety.
But ADA takes a completely different path. It throws this incredibly wide net, aiming to regulate all machine learning models that are intended for high-impact systems. The issue is how ADA defines general-purpose systems.
The wording captures basically any AI system designed for use in many fields and for many purposes.
Which is practically the definition of any modern software tool.
Right. Under this wording, a moderately complex weather forecasting API or even an aggressive grammar checker could get caught in the regulatory dragnet.
Just because it has a wide variety of potential end uses, you could theoretically face severe penalties because your email autocomplete system is deemed general purpose. It completely lacks that crucial proportionality.
And the practical implications of that broad definition are severe, particularly when you look at the compliance mechanics. ADA requires mandatory third-party conformity assessments for all general-purpose systems.
All of them.
All of them. Contrast that with the EU, which only mandates third-party audits for explicitly high-risk systems.
Like real-time biometric categorization or critical infrastructure management.
Yeah.
Things that actually need a deep look.
Exactly.
Let's just think about the logistics of that for a second.
Yeah.
If you require a deep dive third-party audit for every single general-purpose AI tool in the country.
From a power grid monitor down to a startup's new scheduling assistant.
You create a catastrophic traffic jam. We're looking at a massive audit bottleneck. Conducting a conformity assessment on a neural network isn't like checking an accounting ledger.
No, you have to evaluate training data provenance, bias mitigation, model drift.
There simply aren't enough qualified AI auditors globally to handle that volume, let alone exclusively in the Canadian market.
The real-world consequence there is an innovation freeze. If a low-risk scheduling AI has to wait in the same multi-year backlog for an auditor as a high-risk predictive policing algorithm, domestic deployment just grinds to a halt.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here on the penalty side of things. Because the stakes for failing these audits are incredibly different between the EU and Canada.
They are.
The EU AI Act relies on administrative fines. They're huge fines, absolutely, but they're just financial. ADA introduces brand new criminal offenses. But isn't the threat of real consequences like actual jail time the only language that rogue tech developers actually understand?
You're saying fines are just a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, administrative fines just become a line item on a spreadsheet. A cost of doing business for a giant corporation.
Well, if you are dealing exclusively with trillion-dollar hyperscalers, perhaps. But laws apply to everyone. The psychological impact of full criminal offenses,
Including potential imprisonment?
yeah, on a domestic startup founder is immense.
That's a great point. If you're a brilliant machine learning developer in Toronto and you realize that a minor compliance misstep on your low-risk application could literally result in criminal liability, why would you stay?
You wouldn't. And that is the brain drain fear. You move to a jurisdiction with a proportional, risk-based approach.
This really highlights the absolute paradox of Canada's current strategy. On one hand, they're launching the Sovereign Technology Alliance to incubate domestic AI champions and break free from U.S. reliance.
And on the other hand, they are pushing a legislative framework in ADA that is so disproportionately strict it might criminalize the very startups they are trying to empower.
Ultimately driving them right back across the border into the U.S. market.
It is a massive legislative tightrope.
But while lawmakers and policy wonks debate who goes to jail over a predictive text model, there is an active, live-fire algorithmic war happening on our actual networks right now.
Yes. If we shift from the theory of regulation to the active deployment of AI, we enter what is widely recognized as an escalating AI arms race around global disinformation.
And on the absolute front lines of this is a newly upgraded tool called Cypher.
That stands for Countering Influence Through Pattern Highlighting and Evolving Responses.
This was developed by researchers Brian McQuinn and Matthew Taylor. Taylor is a Canada CFAR AI chair based out of the University of Regina in Ami.
They recently secured a Catalyst grant from the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research to significantly upgrade the system's capabilities.
So what is Cypher actually doing? Because what it's fundamentally designed to tackle is the sheer asymmetry of modern generative propaganda.
Historically, disinformation required human troll farms. Real people typing out fake posts.
Today, state-sponsored propagandists use large language models to generate millions of hyper-targeted, localized posts across hundreds of platforms simultaneously.
And manual human fact-checking mathematically cannot scale to meet that volume. It's impossible.
So Cypher utilizes advanced machine learning, specifically things like vector embeddings and anomaly detection, to scan massive troves of foreign media and social platforms. It triages the noise and identifies coordinated patterns of state interference.
But the architecture they're using is critical here. They aren't just letting an LLM autonomously flag and delete posts.
Right, because AI hallucinates, and it definitely doesn't understand political nuance.
Exactly. They use a strict human-in-the-loop architecture. The machine learning model does the heavy lifting of identifying the anomalous narrative clusters, but trained domain expert human fact-checkers make the final verification.
That human grounding is vital to avoid dystopian censorship. An automated moderation tool might flag legitimate domestic political dissent as foreign interference simply because the vocabulary overlaps.
The AI spots the structural anomaly. The human verifies the contextual truth. This hybrid model is what allows organizations like DisinfoWatch to vastly increase their debunking throughput without sacrificing accuracy.
And verifying the truth is harder than ever right now because of what Professor McQuinn refers to as the kernel of truth paradox.
This is fascinating.
We aren't dealing with obvious, poorly translated fake news anymore. The most devastating disinformation campaigns take a verifiable fact and wrap a highly inflammatory lie around it.
There is a perfect, highly illustrative example of this from the active threat landscape in the sources. A Russian state-aligned media outlet recently pushed a sophisticated narrative claiming that the Canadian province of Alberta was actively, officially moving toward independence and secession.
Right. And the cipher system was able to parse the complexity of that claim.
Because there was a kernel of truth.
Exactly. The kernel was that certain separatist groups in the province had actually held public events, and there were reports of them meeting with some U.S. figures.
The algorithm recognized those event nodes as factual.
But the overarching narrative being artificially accelerated, that an official legislative process for separation was actually underway, was entirely fabricated.
The machine learning model is trained to identify that technical delta, the gap between the factual base event and the artificially amplified conclusion being drawn from it.
That specific type of subtle manipulation is designed entirely to validate fringe movements and incite domestic confusion. And the threat matrix orchestrating these campaigns is highly dynamic.
Historically, Russia has been the primary architect of this.
Routinely targeting both the far right and far left with false narratives, injecting baseless claims about neo-Nazi regimes in Ukraine or nuclear weapon pursuits just to fracture societal cohesion.
But the tool is actively expanding because the battlefield is expanding. Cypher is currently deploying upgrades to decode and track Chinese language disinformation networks.
This is intended to close a massive historical blind spot in Western cybersecurity. Language barriers and a lack of cultural context have allowed interference campaigns to deeply penetrate diaspora communities before intelligence agencies even realize what's happening.
It's a huge gap to close, but perhaps the most complex and frankly counterintuitive element of this entire disinformation matrix involves the United States.
Not as a state-sponsored architect of propaganda, though.
No, as the primary vector.
This genuinely changes how you look at your social media feed. The researchers note that the U.S. is increasingly becoming a main source of disinformation in Canada.
Not because the U.S. government is running psyops.
Right, but because the vast majority of Canadian digital dialogue occurs on U.S.-owned infrastructure.
Platforms like X, Meta, YouTube.
And the algorithms driving those platforms are fundamentally optimized for polarized engagement. Verified, factual Canadian news content is actually being algorithmically downgraded and throttled in favor of high-emotion, divisive content.
It creates a dangerous algorithmic vacuum. When platforms actively suppress local, factual reporting to maximize user time on site, they inadvertently build the perfect transmission vector for foreign intelligence services.
The Silicon Valley platforms aren't intentionally spreading foreign propaganda.
But their engagement models act as massive, uncritical amplifiers for campaigns engineered to tear democratic societies apart.
Which brings us to a really fascinating ethical dilemma regarding the tools being built to monitor all of this data. We have to talk about the JSI controversy.
It perfectly illustrates the incredibly messy, borderless nature of AI development right now.
The Canadian government recently awarded a company called JSI a $1 million grant to commercialize AI-enabled data review tools specifically for domestic law enforcement.
On surface, that looks like a straightforward sovereign investment in domestic security tech.
Right. But the reality of data fusion companies is much more complex. JSI also holds a massive multi-million-dollar open contract with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE.
And experts, including researchers from Georgetown University, have highlighted that ICE utilizes these types of advanced analytics, combined with data purchased from Canadian information brokers to build vast, invasive dossiers on individuals.
So, wait, let's play this out for a second. Canadian taxpayers are ostensibly funding the optimization of AI review algorithms for their own local police forces.
But because tech is borderless,
Those same algorithmic improvements could easily be integrated into systems that prioritize deportation targets or facilitate wiretapping operations in Texas.
Exactly. Now, a spokesperson for JSI explicitly stated that they operate with high integrity and comply with all applicable laws. But it perfectly highlights the dual-use nature of AI. A tool built to efficiently parse data doesn't care whose data it is or which country's law enforcement agency is deploying it. It is the borderless ethics of AI data sharing in a nutshell.
It is staggering to think about the scale of the infrastructure we've discussed today. Billion-dollar federated cloud nodes, massive legislative frameworks threatening criminal liability, and neural networks parsing millions of geopolitical data points in real time.
It's a lot to take in.
But amidst all of this high-level technical warfare, there is an incredibly grounded, practical takeaway for you, the listener, navigating this landscape every single day.
Yes, despite all the sophisticated technology deployed in the Cypher project, Professor McQuinn emphasizes that the ultimate transmission vector is still human behavior.
After unpacking millions of dollars in sovereign compute infrastructure designed to catch Russian psyops, his ultimate countermeasure is surprisingly low-tech. It's the 10-second pause.
Just 10 seconds.
Research consistently shows that if you simply wait 10 seconds before you retweet or share a highly emotional piece of content, just 10 seconds to check the source, look at the date, or ask yourself if the claim is actually verifiable, it critically disrupts the viral spread of disinformation.
It is the ultimate bottleneck to a billion-dollar arms race.
Yeah.
Human patience.
It is a profound irony. We're building machines to protect us from our own algorithmic impulses.
Very true.
Okay, let's take a step back and look at the massive landscape we've mapped out today. We started with the geopolitical macro view. Canada and Germany launching the Sovereign Technology Alliance, leveraging the Gaia-X federated framework to build a secure, democratic AI ecosystem free from absolute reliance on U.S. hyperscalers.
Then we navigated the intense regulatory paradox. Canada's proposed ADA framework, which abandons the EU's proportional approach for a sweeping punitive model that risks causing severe audit bottlenecks and criminalizing the very innovation they are trying to foster.
Finally, we went down to the active digital front lines. Researchers deploying the Cypher AI tool, utilizing human-in-the-loop anomaly detection to combat complex state-sponsored disinformation campaigns from Russia and China,
While also navigating the algorithmic vacuums of U.S. platforms and the borderless ethical dilemmas of data brokers like JSI.
It was a landscape defined entirely by its contradictions. We are attempting to impose static national laws on a technology that inherently defies physical geography.
Which leaves us with a pretty compelling final thought.
Yeah, a provocative final thought for you to consider as you log back into your feeds today. We spent a lot of time discussing nations desperately trying to build sovereign technology alliances, erecting secure, localized infrastructure with strict national borders and domestic laws like AI.
Fences around their data.
Right. But if the neural networks driving global culture, the data brokers fusing our personal information, and the disinformation campaigns disrupting our elections operate completely beyond the concept of physical borders, is true digital sovereignty even technologically possible anymore? Or are these governments ultimately just trying to build fences in the clouds?
That is the defining question for the next decade of digital policy.
It's an incredibly heavy reality to leave you with, but exactly the kind of structural shift you need to be aware of as this technology continues to rewrite the rules of global power. Thank you for listening, and see you next time on AI Affairs.